Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Now I request Professor Ravishankar Chendu sir to continue the session. Thank you.
Hello. Uh, it says host disabled participant screen sharing. Okay. Welcome to all participants who have come in, and within 2-3 minutes I will start this webinar, today's webinar, and give me 1 or 2 minutes so that I share my screen. Thank you. Hello. Okay. Today's webinar topic is Future Curricula, Outcome-Based Engineering Education, Teaching Learning Processes, and the Role of Faculty. As you know, most of the changes that take place around in our engineering, be it any branch, most of the jobs are going to be affected. And the new jobs with these technologies incorporated into engineering need entirely new approach, new skills, new workers, new engineers, etc. Hence, we should know what sort of jobs will be available after 10 years, after 20 years, after 30 years. In order to get those jobs, what sort of curricula we have to design for our students, and how we have to implement these curricula, and how we have to transfer these skills so that our students will get benefited and they don't become unemployed. So, keeping this aim in mind, we have designed this webinar, and I thank the management of Adi Shankara Group of Institutions for giving me an opportunity, especially our chairman, Dr. Penchalaya sir, for giving a nice opportunity to conduct this webinar. So I'll start this webinar. Before I go to the exact topic, I would like to tell you a few slides about my gurus. Today, if I tell any important, any nice or any important thing, that's only because of my gurus. The first guru is Carl Wieman. He's a Nobel Prize winner. I attended his teaching learning workshops at Dublin Institute of Technology a decade ago. And whatever the knowledge has given me, I am going to share today. The second one is Dr. Felder. Felder is a consultant to ABET. He is the first person to identify that outcome-based education can be implemented successfully in engineering colleges, and he has brought that into ABET accreditation. He visited all universities abroad and trained faculty. In 2005, I have undergone his workshop on outcome-based education. Dr. Bucchiarelli is a professor emeritus, and was on sabbatical when I was studying at Dublin Institute of Technology. And then I was asked to assist him. During the interactions, I have learned a lot of things from him. He's the first person to write a book called Designing Engineers, which is a Bible for engineering educators. And he has given a lot of inputs for me, which I would like to share as I start the session. Before we talk about future curricula, let us understand what sort of jobs will be there in 2030, 40, or 50. If a student or an engineer can survive only if he is adaptable, acquire the quality of adaptability, he is not going to get a job. And the jobs are multifaceted. One has to do many functions, many roles, which are quite often changeable. At one job, you have to do 3 or 4 different roles to be continuously employed for long. And most of the jobs will be part-time, and they are freelance based. And employers don't want to employ you. They will call you for a specific job for a fixed duration. You complete the job and go. So most of the jobs are going to be temporary jobs, and you are not going to be taken as an employee of an organization. You just come, you will give a task for finite duration, you complete the job, and you go back. So this sort of employment will be there most of the times for engineering graduates from 2030 to 2050. And most of the times, because of the automation, computers create music. Computers create music, they create art, they write novels, they write poetry. So most of the jobs will be taken by the computers, and it will be difficult for us to find jobs what we are doing today. Now, in order to get a job in 2050, you have to continuously update skills, what the jobs need at that particular moment. Today, a job contains particular set of skills, and after a month, new skills will come to do the same job. So you should be adaptive, continuously acquire those skills, and unless otherwise, you will not be employed. Second thing is, training will be there for a day, and your job will be there for a month. After that, again, you have to go for training, and again, you have to go for a job. And it is expected in 2050, 1/4 of the people will be unemployed because of lack of appropriate skills. Then how will be the future work? In future jobs, you have to make complex decisions. You have to use creativity. You have to use leadership. And you should be able to manage yourself. And if you have these qualities, you are going to get jobs in 2050. Otherwise, you are not going to get the jobs. And in future, humans don't need machines, but machines need men to help them to perform jobs. Data plays very important role. In every job, you have to take data, do some analytics, and take some decisions based on the analytics, and then do the task. In 2050, the roles are highly specialized, and knowledge workers are only needed. High-level leadership roles exist, and less specialized jobs will be automated. Then the world will run by robotics. Artificial intelligence and robots will play a major role. Most of the jobs will be modified. Some of the jobs will cease. And there'll be two types of people in the society. One is unemployed, other is people who enjoy the leisure. You can develop robots, you can program robots to do specific jobs, but robots cannot do all the jobs at a time. Need some help in which the humans will help these robots. It is very difficult to design robots for all the jobs. So robots programs to do highly specific jobs, few jobs at a time. They can't do all the jobs at a time. They need human assistance. And by 2050, there'll be 1 billion drones. So to manage 1 billion drones, engineers should have acquired a lot of skills. There'll be a lot of autonomous vehicles on the roads. And to manage autonomous vehicles, again, you need special skills. And most of the aviation vehicles will be through electric energy. There'll be digital twins. What is a digital twin is, suppose you take the case of Singapore. Singapore has a digital twin. So keeping at your computer, you can see what is happening at any junction, anywhere, any building in Singapore. And if you take the case of any international space station, if you want to modify the design or if you want to add something, you can't do that because you don't know what are the consequences. So you build a digital twin, and whatever modifications that you want to change, you apply on the digital twin, see the consequences, and if it is harmless, then you implement on the space station. So most of the systems will have digital twins, and agri-pods will be there, virtual reality will be there, robotics will be there, microgrids will be there, energy storage will be there. Most of the manufacturing will be performed through AI, and the value chain are digitized. The situation in 2050 was then by 2050, you have electricity plus computers. That's what we have even today. And more importantly, you have genomics, you have nanotechnology, you have AI, you have robotics. These are the things which are going to play a dominant role in 2050. Now let us look what sort of jobs will be available at 2040. Entire industries will be redefined because we are going to incorporate robotics, automation, artificial intelligence, machine learning, etc. The way industries look today will be entirely different than what they look in 2040. And these robots need maintenance, monitoring, operation, programming, and suppliers, business developers, and ethicists. So all the robots need this sort of operations. So hence, if anybody learns how to maintain, monitor, program, supply, develop business through robots, and define ethics, then he will get a job. Robots, most of the robots will do jobs with human help. So jobs in 2040 will be based on how best you can help the robots in their jobs. If you have that skill, you will get jobs. Otherwise, you are not going to job. And more importantly, in future, in 2030 or 2040, data is a resource. It is like an oil. So you have more data, you can sell the data, you can use analytics, find the truths, and use that in the operations of industry, training, learning, etc., etc. So the more you have data, the more you can use it. The more you can use it and do business and do your jobs. A lot of unlimited opportunities with this data, and new job categories are emerging. After 10 years, what sort of jobs exist with this data, we don't know. In 2040, we don't know. In 2050, we don't know. Most of these jobs are invisible. The job specifications are unknown as on today, but we should always keep track of the future, how these data will change our engineering skills and jobs. New forms of data, acquiring rights, licensing to users, detectives, data frackers, data analytics, data monitors, data trust officers, data brokers. These are the type of jobs we are going to have in 2040. Then Then
Please, some of the participants are unmuted. Please mute them.
sir, it got stuck.
Hello,
Hello, the screen is stuck, sir.
Sir Chandu Garu. This is
Ah,
Principal Shashaya. You please announce to all the participants to unmute them. Mute
yeah,
their speaker.
that you do, sir.
Uh, request all the participants to mute their speaker.
Hello. Please mute your speakers. All participants, please mute your speakers. Hello.
No, not a speakers, but mic. They should
The
mute their
screen
mic.
is stuck. Please mute all the participants, sir.
Request that they all should mute their mic.
So,
For the person who is not muted, then from the webinar. That is better. The host can remove the person who is disturbing.
sir, the screen is stuck. Can you?
Sir, excuse me, sir. Dear organizers, please make one of your colleague as a co-host so they can mute anybody.
Okay, please mute yourself. It is disturbing as some of the voices are coming here. Okay. The next type of jobs we can have and drones and crews. By 2030, there'll be 1 billion drones in the sky, every possible shape and size. So we can expect by 2030, if you have skills related to drone management, you are going to get a job by 2030. And lot of traffic flow optimizers, maintenance, repair, aerial security, drone design, programming, and sales. And if you teach your students these skills, they are going to get a very good jobs in 2030 because there are 1 billion drones available flying everywhere by 2030 in another 10 years. Now, coming to health scenario, there are a lot of gene therapies that are available to overcome the health problems of people. You have brain augmentationists, aging assistants, gene sequencers, brain neurostimulation professionals. And if you are going to give these skills to your biomedical engineering students, they'll have wonderful opportunity in the next 10 years. There are a lot research is going on to have cars, and if you know how to design, manipulate, program the driverless cars, you are again going to get a lot of jobs. The next important thing for engineers is blockchain. As blockchain is moving into every area of engineering, it has a lot of applications. Those applications are not clear as on today. So in future, blockchain implementations need regulators, designers, UI, UX experts, cloud managers, system analysts, product managers, business development gurus, and so on. So as it is a very important upcoming area, and in order to get the job, say after 5 years, 10 years, blockchain area will be a very important area for engineering. Next important area future jobs will be there is 3D printing, 3D fabrication. You know that today you can build houses, you can build walls, you can use materials, different materials, use different, build some, print some instruments. You can even manufacture your own pill with 3D printing. You can print organs, limbs, and prosthetics. You can do something with reconstructive surgery. You can create food with 3D printers. With this sort of developments, once your engineering students are comfortable with 3D printing, I'm sure they are going to get good business, good jobs, and our job is to equip them with these skills in 3D printing. Next is cryptocurrency. In future, most of the banks are going to disappear. They exist, but most of the banking outlets will be disappearing. So 50% of national currencies in this world will be replaced by cryptocurrencies. So if you can equip your students with cryptocurrencies, how to regulate them, how to bank them, how to transact using cryptocurrencies, how to manage wealth, how to insure, how to mine, how to exchange operators, how to analyze, you are going to get good jobs after 5-10 years of time. Then coming to sensor systems, you know, IoT is in big demand. There will be 1 trillion sensors by 2040, and most of our students will be managing these sensors by 2040. And we need engineers who are designers, who are installers, who are tailors, garment creators, data modelers, data transmission optimizers, signal engineers, architects, and troubleshooters. So through our curriculum, if we are going to equip our students these skills, then the students will get extremely good jobs, and then future will be very bright for them. Then coming to space, you know, SpaceX, it is going to send tourists to Mars, and it is expected that every other day there will be a launch. And to manage these launches, you need a lot of people, command traffic analyzers, command guidance monitors, experienced designers, minimizers, space experts, etc., etc. So this becomes one of the important job areas for engineering, whether electrical, mechanical, civil, communication, etc., etc. One more important emerging area where jobs will be there is mining asteroids. Asteroids have lot of invaluable materials. So they are going to mine in space, and those materials will be used to build space systems, space materials, space instruments, etc. Then fusion power plants. We understand that future will be based on future energy needs will be based on fusion. So all electrical students should be able to design fusion plants, manage them, integrate them. Then they should be able to manage the fusion projects. So if you equip our students with all these things related to fusion power plants, we are going to get good jobs. Then health is a big space, lot of technology, genetics, biomedical engineering will be there, biomanufacturing, organ designers will be there, therapists will be there, genetically modified therapists will be there. So invariably, to take advantage of these genetically modified opportunities, we have to incorporate this sort of issues, topics, skills transfer into our engineering curricula. The next thing is tube transportation. You know, Hyperloop, most of the future transportation is going to be designed through tubes, hyperloops, etc. So our students should be equipped how to build these loops, how to build these tubes, and then how to safely manage them, how to operate them, how to optimize them, how to maintain them, and how to repair them. So tube transportation provides a big opportunity for a lot of jobs in future, which we can take advantage of. Then the future technology is quantum technology, and most of our passwords can be hacked through this quantum technology. Invariably, after some time, maybe 5 years or 10 years, we have to switch over our present day computer systems to systems which work on quantum technology. So to develop this technology and to program, to analyze the data, to monitor, to manage, to design equipment, etc., we have to focus on quantum computing, and it is a highly prospective area, especially for engineers. The speeds of computing will be very fast, and hence any password can be hacked of present day systems. So the switch over to quantum computing based systems is inevitable, and hence we have to teach our students quantum computing as quickly as possible. Then mixed reality, virtual reality, augmented reality, they have a lot of applications in teaching and learning and many other areas, medicine, training, designing, building, etc. And hence virtual reality offers, or mixed reality offers, another area of bright prospects for job search for our engineering students. Then in future, the meat is going to be produced, need not kill animals, and the meat production, artificial meat production will be very huge, and hence you have to have nutritive meat designers, quality control, product development, dietary engineers, process managers, etc., etc. are needed after 5 to 10 years. Then home automation, you know, IoT, every electrical device we are going to connect IoT. There'll be billions of devices which will be connected to the internet, and to manage all these billions of devices, you need engineers, you need smart building installers, clothing developers, health monitors, anthropologists, proximity alert systems, data actuaries, failure point assessors, etc., etc. And IoT and home automation is going to provide huge number of jobs for engineers in next decade. Then very dangerous application of AI is a teacher bot. You can design teacher bots who will replace the teachers in many ways, like course creation, then maintenance and repair, learning coaches, skill building, monitoring, learning optimization, etc., etc. So wherever possible, AI teacher bots will replace teachers unless we are better than them, and we are going to lose our teaching jobs to teach teacher bots. Then what we have to do now? So what we have to do is we have to better prepare. Suddenly, if somebody comes and says from tomorrow you have to acquire new skills, it will be very difficult. So we have to plan the transition from the present day systems to the future systems, which need entirely different skills, so that we'll be better, make our students better equipped. We are going to design, we are going to implement our teaching learning processes in such a way that in future, the transition from present day education to our present day jobs to future jobs will be seamless. So the message is better be prepared now rather than face the problems of adaptation to new situations which are entirely new for us. So what sort of skills we need? So 10 years back, I prepared a slide when I was giving outcome-based education workshops. These are the skills I used to advise my teaching community that you have to implement in the classroom or in the processes that we implement in the colleges. Independent, interdependent, lifetime, problem solving thinking, creative thinking, interpersonal, teamwork, communication, self-assessment, integrative, global thinking, change management skills. And honestly speaking, some of these skills we ourselves don't know. When we don't have these skills, how we can equip our students about these skills? So the role of faculty will come here. So before we ask, we transfer the students, we first should acquire these new skills that are required for future jobs. Then we can transfer them to our students through proper processes, so that students after 10 years will not face the problem of unemployment because he doesn't acquire the right skills. Then what are the skills you need today? We just have seen skills 10 years back. Now you see the skills what we need today. The top 5 soft skills is creativity, persuasion, collaboration, adaptability, and emotional intelligence. I'm sure many of our teaching members, faculty, may not have these skills. So what we have to do is, what our role is, quickly acquire these skills and try to use those skills to educate our students. What are the 10 hard skills today's engineer need to get good jobs? One is blockchain, that I already told. Second is cloud computing, we already know. Analytical reasoning, artificial intelligence, everybody know. UX design, business analysis, affiliate marketing, sales, scientific computing, and video production. So these are the skills required as on today, 2020, so that our students can get better jobs. Then what we'll do is, we'll go ahead after 10 years and see what are the skills in 20. Okay, some more skills we need: leadership, global engineering skills, innovation, and entrepreneurship. These are required as on today, because most of the engineering students are encouraged to start their own ventures, and you need innovation to design products. You need entrepreneurial skills to manage your startup. You need to lead people, and you need to lead at global level. So you need global engineering skills. Then some more things are engineering fundamentals, analytical skills, experience, experimental skills, modern engineering tools, design skills. These are all what are required as on today on 2020. Then I just have a slide for you, which tells you skills after 10 years. We have to make our students acquire rigorous engineering knowledge. He should have critical thinking and unstructured problem solving. We train our students to have structured problem solving, but future problems need unstructured problem solving. And unless we acquire unstructured problem solving, we can't help our students after 10 years. Interdisciplinary and system thinking. Most of the our products these days we design, the effect is felt very, very far. Suppose, for example, you design a processing plant which is polluting. The pollution reaches can reach many countries. So a system is an area where the effect of your product is felt. So unless you have system thinking approach, the effects, bad effects that our products generate, we can't overcome. Then we have creativity and initiative. Unless you are creative, you are not going to sustain after 5 or 10 years. So we have to teach our students how to be creative, how to use new technology, how to reduce costs, how to produce at a shorter time. The present day situation, you can see COVID. We need we need medicine. We need to overcome this situation. Only 3-4 institutes across the world came with a vaccine. One is Oxford, and one is Serum Institute in Pune, and there are 4-5, one in China and 2-3 others. So the problem is so acute. Unless you have the right knowledge, ability, skill, innovative capability, and managing this entire innovation process, you are not going to solve the problem of COVID. So this sort of problems will quite often come in future. So unless we make our students creative and collaborative, take initiative, have understanding of system thinking and a global mindset. For example, if you take Chinese, they have not given us much to the world regarding COVID. So they have prevented lot of, they could have prevented had they had this global mindset. They, unfortunately, the world is suffering because of lack of global mindset. Diversity, how to understand the diversity, how to work with the diversity, how to behave in a diverse environment, how to be mobile, go to another country and work, cultures, engagement, professional learning, employability, and lifelong learning. It is expected that these skills will dominate after, say, 10 years. Some of them are already dominating now, like lifelong learning, but this will continue for another 10 years. And so, unless we design curricula which provide these skills for or which transfer these skills to our students, and our curricula, our process may not do justice. What are the other skills probably we need in future? Probably design thinking is also much talked about today. And it is very difficult to estimate what skills we need in 2040 or what skills we need in 2050, because the type of jobs, the specifications of jobs in 2040 or 2050 are not entirely visible as on today, and it will be extremely difficult to visualize after 20 years, after 30 years. But we have to extrapolate our knowledge as on today to find out, to estimate, to guess what sort of requirement regarding the skills required to do jobs we have to do. Unless we do that, as I told you, adapting at that time will be very difficult. If we are prepared for Corona, we'd have no problems, because we are adapting to Corona, which is imposed on us. Life has become very, very difficult for us. So engineers will also face this sort of adaptability problems in future, unless we give them right education, right skills. They will be more uncomfortable. Then, as you all know, till today we have not implemented internet-based teaching in most of the colleges. Suddenly, Corona or COVID-19 has come, and most of the colleges switched to online teaching. But the quality of teaching may not be that good compared to the classroom teaching. Had we prepared for this sort of situation, say 2 years before or 4 years before, today our students might not have faced this lack of quality. If you go to US, many of the university students are asking universities to refund the money, because of online teaching is not as good as the classroom based teaching. And today we know that physical presence is not necessary for learning. We can teach from anywhere. Student can learn from anywhere. Student can get credits from anywhere. And we have to implement blended learning, and ethics should be there in our assessments. Skill transfer, whether we are transferring skills through online teaching, we have to check. We have to do some research. We have to do some studies, and we have to see whether the quality issues are arising or not. Then degrees can be offered through synergy. We can meet, we can arrange, collaborate with big universities and offer some of their credits to our students and make our degrees more versatile, and they give the right skills we have discussed for future. Curriculum is a collection of experiences, and you can get this experience from anybody, and there is open courseware, and we can take advantage of this situation to be more efficient, and we can transfer most of the required skills to our students even through online learning. Unless we do some research, we do extra work, we may not be successful in our efforts to make online quality of teaching as good as the classroom based teaching. Now, as I told you, I will deal with outcome based education. Most of you know what are the basics of outcome based education. And in outcome based education, we define mission vision statements of the institution. We define program educational objectives. We define program outcomes, and we define the course learning outcomes. Most of the lecturers, most of the faculty members, we are worried more about course learning objectives. Hence, I will pay more focus on course learning outcomes. Then, as you know that in 3 years of our 4-year program, there are 36 subjects, and then we have a lot of outcomes, program outcomes we have to implement. And then we are going to do that in each of the 36 subjects we have in these 3 years. We should know how to write mission vision statements, which I will tell. You should know how to write program educational objectives, program outcomes, and the course outcomes. All these statements should be aligned with each other. If the vision mission statements say we are preparing global engineers, and your course outcome should also be at that level, and your program PO should be at that level, and your PO should also be at that level. Coming to one important thing is, most of the times you don't physically understand what are the purpose of these statements which I will be delivering, which I'll be trying to explain in next. Mission vision statements, there are 3 important things. It tells us purpose, it gives our goals, it gives our values. So the statements which we write to as mission vision statements, they should tell the people the purposes, the goals, and the values for which our institution has been started. Then the statement should be measurable, they should be actionable, they should be achievable. For example, I will tell you actionable. Suppose you say I will produce globally competent engineers, and if a college doesn't have basic resources, and if it says I will produce globally competent engineers, we know that it is highly impossible. For example, if you take MIT, MIT spends so much money to develop, to educate, to train their students so that they solve problems at global level. They solve very huge problems at global levels. Without resources, without faculty, without research, without knowledge, how a small college in a remote location can develop engineers or train engineers who can solve problems at global level? It is highly impossible. Maybe there may be odd cases occasionally, but more often it is not possible. So if I start telling I will produce MIT level graduate without enough resources, it is not actionable and it is not achievable. And the statements we write should be clear, simple, and should be in layman's language. So when we write mission vision statements, we should be extra cautious not to use high sounding words in our statements. And we have to use outcome based education to acquire the skills. And in order to implement outcome based education, most of the colleges, what they do is they don't design their courses as per the outcome based education process. You can see the figure on my screen. When you design a course as per OBE or outcome based education, you have to consider 3 things. One is learning objectives. Most of us are going to write these learning objectives, but we are going to neglect other 2 things, like what instruction I have to use, what instructional method I have to use to realize the outcomes. Most of the times, as you know, we go for chalk and talk type of teaching to realize all sort of outcomes irrespective of whether we can realize them or not. So instruction becomes very important. When you write your outcomes, you have to tell what are the instructional methods you will use to realize the outcomes. What are the strategies you implement to realize the outcomes? Unless you define those strategies with teaching learning, you can't implement all types of outcomes, and you can't transfer the skills which you promise your students to transfer through your outcomes written. Hence, from now onwards, whenever you write outcomes, along with it, you have to give what are the instructional methods by which you are trying to transfer those skills are you are trying to realize those outcomes. Then very, very important is assessment. If your assessment is proper, you get the evidence to prove that you have successfully implemented your outcome. Most of the times in question papers, in mids or assignments or final semester exams, there will be no relation between your outcomes and your question papers. Hence, uh, uh, proving that you have successfully implemented the outcome will be extremely difficult. Outcome based education is nothing but any activity you do, it is to get the evidence that you have successfully implemented your outcome. And assessment is one instrument where you can get, where you can develop, where you can gather the required evidence to prove that you have successfully implemented the outcomes. Most of the times what people do is they give you some formulae based on the amount of marks that are given to the students. Suppose if I teach a course with 60 students, I go to the marks of mid sem 1 sem 2 and the final marks, and based on the marks I'll be given a formulae, and this formulae I use, and I get some number of 70 or 60 or 75 and say, because I got 70, I have successfully implemented my outcomes, which is not true in most of the cases, because there is no relation between your assessment and your learning outcomes. There is no relation between your learning outcomes and your instruction. So what you are telling, the accreditation teams may not agree if they know that this process is wrong. Then when we design courses for outcome-based education, you use 5 steps. The first step is you write the course goals. They should be measurable. You should not use words which are not measurable. For example, you say, my student will be able to know. Able to know, you can't measure it directly. Hence, you should not use the word know, which is not measurable, while you write your course goal. Second thing is, as engineers are expected to do higher level jobs like analyzing, designing, synthesizing, uh, comparing, etc., etc., we should always write objectives in such a way that they always fall on the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. It's very simple. Third thing is, objectives should address the outcomes. So the outcomes of ABET engineering criterion. Even in NBA, they have engineering criteria. ABET, they have their, whenever you are designing a course for ABET accreditation or NBA accreditation, you see their criteria. There should be a one-to-one correspondence between your objectives and what they demand in your course, if you want their accreditation. So that match you have to see. Then the fourth one is very important, is implement instructional methods. As I told you already in my earlier slide, most of the times in India, most of the engineering colleges, they don't focus on instructional methods. There are a lot of active learning mechanisms, active learning methods, where you can really incorporate and make a difference in realizing the outcomes. Because realizing outcome is nothing but transferring the right skill to the students. If you are successful in realizing the outcomes, obviously you transfer the right skill to your students. As you have seen the skills of 2030, 2040, and 2050, unless you write your outcomes and implement the right instructional methods, these skills may not be transferred. And if these skills are not transferred appropriately, your admissions are going to suffer, because most of the students fail to get employment. So you should be very careful. You should focus all your efforts on your instructional methods and how you write your outcomes. Then the last one is variety of learning assessment tools. As I told you earlier, whenever an accreditor comes to you, an NBA team comes to you and says, prove that you have implemented your outcomes successfully. If your assessment is appropriate, from the assessment, you are going to derive the evidence that you have implemented it successfully. So your assessment tool should be highly appropriate, and unless otherwise, you are not going to prove to the NBA teams that you have successfully implemented your outcomes. Then what is the course design process? If you see, first write course goals, then develop course outcomes, then as I told you, select instructional practices, and more important, which most of the people in India don't do, is develop instructional materials. This is very, very important to make outcome-based education successful. Most of the times we depend on a textbook. Textbooks are written for a broader audience. So if you keep the textbook in ditto, first chapter, second chapter, etc., you are not going to do justice, and that means you don't understand the OBE process efficiently. Now coming to instructional material, based on your outcomes you have written, you have to derive the content from the outcomes. From the content, for the topics you have enlisted for each outcome, you are going to prepare a material so that the student need not go to the library, spend his oil, wait till midnight, and then do your assignment or do some assessment or to do some projects, etc. So you will make the life of the students extremely easy when you prepare an instructional material as per the course outcomes which you have written. And this never happens in India, except maybe IITs and some other good top ranking institutes does. But most of the average engineering college, most of the times they depend on materials which are available. And the trend is you just copy these materials and put on your website, which is also not true, because the material which is developed by some other college may not be appropriate for the outcomes you have written, because your outcomes are different and their outcomes are different. If you understand the OBE process very well, you have to define, you have to derive, you have to develop your own outcomes, your own material, your own instructional material, your own instructional methods, and before you implement this in a semester, you have to test it somewhere. Without testing, you should not rub your instructional material onto the students. For example, I developed a corona vaccine. I can't just simply prescribe it to people. It will have a lot of people will die. So it is, instructional materials are also so damaging if you don't prepare in a nice way. Hence, this is very, very important. Then instructional activities. As I told you, outcome-based education will not be successful if you teach them in the class all the 100 hours. So you have to design activities inside the class so that student will do the activity, perform the task, and through which is going to acquire the skill set what you are aiming to transfer. Unless you do active learning, you will not be successful. You cannot be successfully realizing your outcomes. So what sort of activities you require, you design, you should do a lot of study, research, etc., etc. Unless otherwise, you are not going to be successful. And then finally assess the outcomes. As I told you, assessment is extremely important in outcome-based education. Then I have seen many colleges, they never bother about mission vision statements that appear on their notice boards or gates, but they do entirely different than what is mentioned in the mission vision statement. Mission vision statements guide you into your day-to-day activities. They set standards, they focus on common goals, they guide you in employee decision making, they make you behave ethically. So whatever statements you write, you have to implement them into your day-to-day practices, unless it is of no use. Then they can also be used for external support, public relation tool, closer linkages, better communication can be used. For example, I will tell you, on your screen you can see two statements. One is given by a small private college, the vision statement. You can say, to provide graduates with global standards in field of ECE to competitive, techno-savvy, innovative, socio-ethical, promotion of economic, etc., etc. This is a small college. The words used are very, very high sounding. And as I told you, they are not measurable, they are not actionable, they are not implementable. And there is no point in using those words in mission vision statements. And it will be a decorative piece rather than it will be able to guide your processes inside the colleges. For example, you see University of Sheffield, which is ranked below 50 in the world in engineering programs, that research, teaching, and learning together create a positive culture of higher education. They really produce engineers at global level, but they never tell that we do that. They never use high sounding words, which they cannot implement. In fact, they can implement any level of teaching process. They have lot, even even they have a chip fabrication facility 20-30 years back at University of Sheffield, but they never do a lot of they never tell a lot of hi-fi statements in vision statements. Coming to mission statements, you can see the definition of a mission statement. It should contain three things. One is, it should tell you what is the company's business, what are the objectives. Third is, what is the approach to reach. These are the three things you should find in a mission statement. For example, you would see the mission statements of University of Sheffield: to educate others and ourselves, and to learn through doing so, thereby improving the world. You see, for example, what is the company's business? It is to educate. Then what is the objective? Objective is to improve the world. And what is the approach? It is through learning. So by mission statement itself, you can tell whether an institute is of high quality or not. Used only 15 words. There are no high sounding words. They have very simple words. A layman can understand their mission statements. So most of the times in India, most of the colleges will use words which they are not capable of implementing. So define clearly what your company business is, what are the objectives, and what are the approaches you will implement to reach, to make things clear. Then you take, for example, a big university in India. It has this mission statement. You can read. I'll give a minute's time. It says, to redefine, to revolutionize, to unlock, to current and future generation, to instill, to make, to proud, sustainable, creating, disseminating, applying, actionable engineering. Some of these words are don't have any meaning. They are not realizable. They are not actionable. And by this itself, I can tell if you are a good OBE implementer, we need not go to accreditation team. We need not do self studies. We don't need to do all these processes. With simple mission statement, we can tell whether the college can implement things properly, or does it has quality or not. Then the alignment is one of the problem in most of the OBE implementation. The mission vision statement tells something, the POs tell something, POs tell something, the course learning objectives tell something. So we have to align all these things should fall in one line, and they should tell the same thing. If mission statement says global competencies, POs also should tell the same thing. POs should also tell the same thing. The teaching you do should have the same thing. The labs you offer should have the same thing, same quality. The instrumentation should have the same quality, and the teaching assessment should also have the same quality and quantity. So most of the colleges fail because the alignment will be missing in all these statements. Coming to program educational objectives, goals, I am not going to dwell much on this because much water has flown down, and most of you know these things, and it will be very boring if I repeat the definitions. So I just skip this. And more, this is very important. You can see program outcome. Program outcomes should contain three things. One is knowledge, one is skills, and third is attitudes. If you go to Wolin School of Engineering, USA, which is which does a lot of research on engineering education, they say future engineers for 2030, 2040, or 2050, they need knowledge, skills, and mindsets. Mindset is the new buzzword that most people don't know, that future jobs will, the success of future jobs depends on the mindset of our engineering students. So we have to focus on mindsets for future jobs. As on today, we are focusing on knowledge, skills, and attitudes, but in future, we have to focus on mindsets. Now, the basics of outcomes I will tell you. And as a teachers, we are more worried about what are the objectives we write while going to a class. So objectives should, there should be some knowledge, some thinking, and some doing. Objectives always with reference to teachers, and it has a teaching intention. The intention of going to classroom is to develop something. That something in terms of words will become our objective. Coming to the outcome, it is always student-centered. It is actual achievement. After I take a class, what did I transform? What did I equip my students with? So that result, we call it as outcome. Objectives are intentions, outcomes are results. As most of you know, it should have knowledge, abilities, and it should have attitudes. They are nothing but skills. They achieved results, and they're always student-centered. You take this slide, it is very important. You see two rotis, one prepared by a wife through arranged marriage, and the second one, which is on the lower half of the screen, is the roti prepared by a wife through love marriage. Suppose, for example, these two ladies were sent for a job. How does the hotel select these two people? Obviously, the job goes to the first lady on the top, and the lady through love marriage will not get this job because the outcome of preparation of the entire process of roti is very, very bad. When we write outcomes, we have to physically feel, we have to understand the consequences of not realizing the outcomes in our process, teaching learning processes inside the college. Now, two very important words in outcome-based education is observability and measurability. When the outcomes are observable, they can be measurable. So what we have to do is, when we write the statements of outcomes, we have to see that these statements can be observable and hence can be measurable. Suppose, for example, I will say civil engineering program will think, graduates will think critically. Critical thinking cannot be observable directly, and you have to give some long exercise, and you have to need efficient expertise to say whether the student acquired those skills, thinking skills or not. It cannot be directly seen. It cannot be directly observed. So when you can't observe, you can't measure them either. And coming, suppose if you write, the graduate will interpret, analyze, evaluate, construct argument. You give data, ask them to analyze. If his analysis is correct, you can observe. When you can observe whether the student can analyze or not, you can measure. So this observability and measurability will make your life simpler, because it produces enough evidence for you when the accreditation teams comes to you, because you can show that your outcomes are observable and they can be measurable. Once you measure the outcomes, you have evidence. The same evidence you can keep on the table for any checking teams to come. So this is simple, this student learning outcome. It involves three things: cognitive, attitudinal, behavioral, and it is a skill, competency, achievement. It is inseparable. Your behavior lies, your student behavior depends on whether you have the skill or not. Then you should know, you should think, and you should do. Most of the learning students acquire through doing. So unless they are passive listeners, if they do themselves, they learn better. If they listen, they may not learn that much. So any teaching activity, any OBE implementation involves two things. One is knowing, other is doing. So as a teacher, your role is to design activities which implements active learning, and you will offer those activities to the student. Student performs those jobs, those tasks, and once he performs the job successfully, he is going to acquire those skills automatically. So what is the definition? So true learning out demonstration that your student can apply. Suppose I teach Ohm's law. Unless my student is able to apply somewhere in a circuit, there is no point in learning the statement of or the definition of Ohm's law. Whatever you teach, whatever your knowledge you teach, the student should be able to apply in a new situation, not the same situation you have taught them in the class. You taught a derivation in a class, but in the examination you should ask the same derivation with a different condition. Unless you are asked in a new situation, the student is not going to learn anything. So the student should demonstrate whatever he has learned in an application if you are successful outcome based teacher. And this statement is very nice. It says that if you have 36 subjects in 3 years, and if each lecturer successfully implements outcome-based outcomes for his subject, automatically the program outcomes are realized. So the importance is on individual lecturers to successfully implement the learning outcomes. When every lecturer successfully implements learning outcomes, automatically at program level, at department level, the outcomes will be realized. Then, as I told you, they should be observable and measurable. When they are observable and measurable, you can use them in assessment. When you can use them in assessment, you can get the evidence of successful implementation. Then most of the faculty, even though they say that we implement outcome-based education, but they don't know the process of writing these outcomes for a subject. As you know, the time is limited in a semester. The contact hours between you and the student is limited. So you should use it effectively and maximally so that it will benefit the student. So if you are given a subject and if you have to write outcomes, what you have to do is first hypothesize. That means that you are going to imagine all possible things as outcomes. Suppose you get 50 outcomes. Then you have to refine those 50 outcomes and then prepare a list of 4 to 6 outcomes for a semester for a subject so that the student is comfortable and you are comfortable, you don't feel shortage of time, and then implementation is very easy. How do you refine these 50 hypothesized statements? What you have to do is you have to refer to the outcome-based education, then you have to consult senior faculty, you have to consult industry practitioners, you have to consult the researchers, then they will give a lot of inputs that this is good, this is not useful now, in future this sort of outcomes is necessary, these skills are a must after 10 years. This sort of inputs will be given. Based on that, you are going to refine your outcomes. Then you have to use Bloom's taxonomy. As I told you, most of your outcomes should be on the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. Then most of the faculty don't understand why we write outcomes. There are a lot of benefits of writing the outcomes. One is identify the critical course material. So based on the outcomes you have shortlisted, what are the topics I have to teach? So to devise the topics, which topics I have to teach, you have to write outcomes. But most of the colleges, they go the reverse way. They first set the syllabus and then write the outcomes. That means they have not understood the OBE process at all. And most of the colleges does that. So if you want to be a good OBE guy, you have to identify the critical course material after writing your outcomes. Then organize the topics which should come first and which should come later. If you if you teach topics which are not relevant as on today, the student get confused, and you have to allot appropriate time to appropriate topic. Then you have to delete topics which are not useful, and you have to design, as I told you earlier, in-class activities to implement active learning. Unless you implement in-class activity or active learning, or you just simply teach, not going to be successful in your implementation. So then you have to ensure comprehensive coverage, and you have to exercise all Bloom's level. And more importantly, as I told you earlier, you have to provide a study guide. So based on the topics, you are going to prepare your study guide. And unless these are the reasons why we prepare our objectives, why we write objectives. Unless you don't know, you are going to implement. You are not going to implement these things. Then suppose if I teach electronics 1, next semester is electronics 2. So those things should be different. So as the time I have already exceeded, I'll do quickly. Then one good example I will tell you how to write. For a incompressible Newtonian fluid in fully developed laminar flow in circular pipe, the student will be able to calculate the average fluid velocity, maximum velocity, given radial position, pressure drop, etc., etc. A chemical engineering student will be doing these calculations to take decisions on process control. So that you are teaching in your chemical production, plant production control. So this sort of outcomes are observable. You can measure. You can give this as a question in the class examination, and the student can successfully do that. And there are a lot of examples I can give you. I'll take 5 more minutes to complete this presentation. So you have to find the learning outcomes by the end of the lecture, what you are doing. By the end of the week, what you are doing. By the end of the course, you should start with an action verb. These verbs are prohibited. The student will be able to know. These verbs are necessary. Knowing is necessary, but the student should be able to do. Student will learn, student will appreciate, student will understand. These are critically important, but the student is not going to gain something. They are not directly observable, and you should not write your outcomes using these words. Then what you have to do is, you have to do in-class activities. Then you have to revise your engineering curriculum. You have to implement alternating teaching methods. You have to do some instructional methods. And you should make student learn how to learn. You should not make student dependent on you for learning. You should make student independent of the teacher. He should know how to learn by himself. He should not be dependent on yourself. He should be autonomous. He should be learning himself, and the teacher is just a facilitator. And in the class, you should have a democratic environment. And I'm skipping all this, and with this I will end my webinar. To sum up, what I do is, we understood what are the future jobs, what are the future skill requirements, what are the outcome based processes, how to write outcomes, how to implement, what are the active learning mechanisms, what are observable outcomes, what are measurable outcomes, how to get evidence, and what are alternative teaching learning methods. And you can explore, and you can contact me if you need further assistance in any of the issues I have raised. I'll be very glad to help you. And lastly, I will take the opportunity to thank our beloved chairman, who provided me an excellent opportunity to conduct this webinar. And then Dr. Mohan sir, our director, and who encouraged me and who gave me permission to conduct this webinar. I thank both of them. And lastly, and you can, if you have a feedback and if you have any queries, you can write to me at dq@adishankara.ac.in. I think the spelling mistake, dq@adishankara.ac.in. And you can note my number, 888-668-3896. I hope you have a pleasant learning experience through this webinar. I will be extremely thankful in future if you need my assistance or my organization's assistance. Adishankara Group of Colleges will be at the forefront to train faculty of engineering colleges across the country. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. On behalf of Adishankara Group of Institutions, we are very much thankful to Professor Ravishankar Chendu Garu for spending his valuable time to share thoughtful message to all the participants. We are very much thankful to management and director sir to organize this webinar. We thank all the delegates and participants joining us and made this event a grand success. All the participants will receive e-certificate to your mail IDs by today on or before today evening. Thank you all. See you again. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Varaprasad, sir.
Sir, thank you.
Thank you.